Hello, it is September 2020. Um, in the last few months, we've seen record numbers of gun sales, primarily due to the COVID-19 situation and the upcoming elections. We always see a spike in firearm sales during election season. A majority of these firearm sales are new gun owners, and this video is going to be targeted towards them. I wanted to give an explanation of double action pistols. So if you already understand how those work, this video will probably be a waste of your time. So let's get to it. So right here in front of you is actually not a double action pistol, but I thought it would be a good way to start to set the example of specifically what double action means. And this can apply to both semi-automatic pistols and to revolvers. This pistol here in front of you is a Browning high power, and I wanted to illustrate what a single action pistol is. So right now I go to pull the trigger and nothing happens. In order for this gun to fire, because it is a single action semi-auto, the hammer has to be cocked in order for the gun to fire. The gun will not fire with the hammer down. So in this case, single action means the hammer performs one function. Now, what we have here is a double action semi-auto pistol. This particular pistol is a Smith & Wesson Model 411. These were very popular in the 1990s. They are no longer made, but allow me to demonstrate. Unlike the Browning high power, when I pull the trigger, the hammer will cock and fire. And essentially, that's what double action means. One pull of the trigger performs two functions, hence double action. In this case, it essentially cocks and fires the hammer. So, as far as examples of double action pistols, I wanted to show you some various types of double action pistols and some various functions that you'll see of the various types of double action pistols. So let's just start with this gun. First of all, it has a slide mounted safety. The gun is safe, it will not fire. And it's also called a decocker, meaning if this hammer is back, if I depress this lever, it will safely drop the hammer without firing the gun. That's a decocker. So there's some pros and there's some cons to these. One of the cons, and it doesn't happen so much with this particular type of firearm or with this particular brand, but it's a complaint very common to the Beretta 92 series, and that when you go to rack the slide to chamber around, oftentimes when people do that, and I've got it gripped a little backwards here. Typically, you might go overhand. But long story short, what will happen is during the process of racking the slide, the safety / decocker will get depressed. So it'll happen when the slide comes forward, the gun will not be ready to fire. Also, one issue that was common, more so to the Berettas, but it's been a complaint of these a little bit, these Smith & Wesson third generation double action pistols, is that when you're carrying the gun in a holster, you might tend to bump it. You come out of the holster and the gun's actually not ready to fire. So there's a solution to this, and Beretta calls it their G series or their government model, and a lot of companies offer this, but essentially what you're looking at is it's a decock only function, meaning this lever right here, this lever is not a safety, it simply safely decocks the pistol. And I've got another example that I'm going to show you in a minute, but let me set this aside. And this is just another Smith & Wesson, and it pretty much functions the same way. It's got a safety and a decocker. It's a little bit smaller gun, but what's different about this is the hammer is bobbed. So if you see, the hammer's back, and this gun is pretty much designed for concealed carry, or it was when it came out in the 80s. So a hammer is just something that can snag when it's coming out of the holster or coming out of the pocket. So sometimes these are mistakenly called hammerless. They're not. There's a hammer there. It's just a bobbed hammer. But ultimately, it's the same design, same deal. You've got a slide-mounted safety / decocker. Moving forward, we're going to move into the decocker-only examples. This is a Sig Sauer P229. And in this gun, right here is a frame, not a slide mounted. The decocker is mounted on the frame. So if I depress the decocker, it drops the hammer safely. Now, there's no actual physical manual safety on this gun. So basically the first trigger pull, it's a heavy trigger pull, that is your safety. Now, that's something that I forgot to mention earlier, and that's sort of an advantage. I mentioned the cons of the slide-mounted safeties. Just of double-action pistols in general, what's thought to be the safety is that the first trigger pull is long and heavy, and then when you're shooting and the slide cycles, your consecutive shots, your follow-up shots are going to be what's called single action, which is a much shorter, as you see the reset there, and lighter trigger pull. This takes a little bit getting used to. It takes some mastering. Essentially, your first shot, which might be argued as your most important shot, is going to be heavy and significantly more difficult, whereas your follow-up shots are going to be shorter, crisper, lighter. But that's the concept of the double action, is your first shot, that long trigger pull, being a safety feature. Now, moving on to something a little bit more unique. This pistol here is a CZ82. It's a Czechoslovakian gun. Obviously not produced anymore because the country doesn't exist. But this is an example of a double action / single action pistol with a slide mounted safety. So similar to that Browning high power I showed you earlier, the safety is in a very similar location, easily swiped by the thumb. That was popularized on the 1911, which is a single action, typically 45 caliber pistol, although available in a bunch of other calibers. It's commonly or originally designed for the 45. So this gun can be carried in what's called cocked and locked, meaning the hammer back, safety on. When you draw the pistol, you would swipe your safety and press the trigger. Or, which I don't recommend, you can carry it hammer down just like the other guns. So your first trigger pull's in double action. However, if you see what I just did there, you have to drop the trigger on a live round. There's no way to safely decock it. So you could carry it like this with the long heavy trigger pull to start, with the follow-up shots being in single action. So this is a CZ82. Now, something to note, this is not exclusive to this pistol, this type of safety on a double action pistol. There are pistols that have a safety and a decocker in a similar location. So what you would do to decock it is essentially you would swipe it all the way down, and it would safely decock the pistol. One pistol that's famous for this is a Beretta Model 84. There's others, but that's one that's very common with that feature. Moving right along, another example. This is going to be a little bit of a wild card. The double action only revolver. And before we get into the double action only revolver, both the Smith & Wesson semi-autos that I demonstrated and the Sig Sauer semi-auto that I demonstrated, all these models are available in double action only features or variants. And typically what that means is they still have a hammer, they will not have a decocker, and usually they won't have a safety, because that hammer is always going to stay down, and even after the slide cycles and you fire around, the hammer goes back down into the double action position. So most modern revolvers, minus the cowboy guns and cowboy reproduction guns, are double action, and you'll see that they'll still have a hammer. So just like the semi-autos I showed you, you could cock a hammer, making the trigger pull lighter and easier, but they can also be fired in a double action mode, meaning the hammer will cock and then drop as the cylinder turns. So in this case, the two modes that the double action on this revolver function is, aside from firing the hammer, it's moving the cylinder on the revolver. Now, these are incorrectly called hammerless guns. They're not. There's a hammer inside of here. But long story short, these were designed for police agencies and early on concealed carry. We didn't have all the options 40, 50, 60 years ago that we have now for small compact guns. So Smith & Wesson created various types of snub nose small frame revolvers that did not have an exposed hammer. Now, some of them had a hammer that you could still thumb cock, but there's a shroud over it like a hump back. And then they made these, which again, you can't access a hammer at all. And the only safety feature of this gun is the long, heavy double action trigger pull, which takes some mastering, but once you get used to it, it can be an effective tool. So, just to wrap it up again, double action essentially means when you're pulling the trigger, it performs a couple of different functions. Single action pistols require the hammer effectively to be cocked before they fire. I can do a whole video on that, but double action is just certainly more complex and requires a little bit more of an explanation. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you were unclear on the matter, and if you have any questions, please hit them down in the comments below. And if you like the content, please hit the like button, the thumbs up, and subscribe. Thank you.